a consistent dialogue with the FBI for the weeks and months prior to the New York Post. Is that fair?
I had ongoing conversations with the FBI for years, I would say, about election security.
And in response to Mr. Fry earlier, you said you would not categorize the FBI communications as pressure.
No, I would not.
However, Twitter's director of policy wrote to you in 2020 that Twitter has seen a sustained effort by the intelligence community to push Twitter and that Twitter should keep a solid front against these efforts. He specifically cited Elvis Chan, an FBI agent in San Francisco. Now, on August 11, 2020, Agent Chan sent you 3 documents in prep for a meeting and said the documents pertain to APT-28, a hacking unit connected with Russian military intelligence. Agent Chan arranged for having security clearance for Mr. Baker and facilitated encrypted networks for the FBI to share information with Twitter employees. And on October 14th of 2020, you stated that this feels a lot like somewhat of a subtle leak operation. Earlier today, you testified that you were following national experts on Twitter, national security experts on Twitter, as a reason to take down the New York Post story on Hunter Biden's laptop.
Yes, sir, I did.
So, after 2016, you set up all these teams to deal with Russian interference, foreign interference. You're having regular meetings with the FBI. You have connections with all of these different government agencies, and you didn't reach out to them once?
Is that question in reference to the day of the New York Post
Yeah.
article? That's right. We generally did not reach out to the FBI to consult on content moderation decisions, especially where they related to domestic activity. It's not that we wouldn't have liked that information. We certainly would have. It's that I don't believe it would have been appropriate for us to consult with the FBI.
In December of 2020, you did a declaration to the Federal Election Commission that the intelligence community expected a leak and a hack operation involving Hunter Biden. Recently, Mark Zuckerberg confirmed that the FBI warned Meta that there was a high effort of Russian propaganda, including language specific enough to fit the Hunter laptop Biden security story. You're talking to these people for weeks and months, years prior to this leaking. They have specifically told you in October that there's going to be a leak potentially involving Hunter Biden's laptop. They legitimately and literally prophesized what happened. And you didn't contact any of them?
No, sir, I did not.
Did they reach out to you?
On and around that day, to the best of my recollection, no, they did not.
So after the story was taken down and you guys did it and you personally disagreed with it, Ms. Gaddy, you said you did. Did you contact them and say, hey, is this what you were talking about?
If that question was directed to me, no, I did not.
Ms. Gaddy, did you talk to anybody from the FBI?
Not to the best of my recollection.
So I guess my question is, what is the point of this program? You have constant communication. They're set up for foreign interference. They've legitimately warned you about this very specific thing, and then all of a sudden everybody just walks away? Like, this is what you planned for. This is what you prepared for. This is the information. They told you exactly what was going to happen, and then you want, I don't care if it's members of Congress, you legitimately want the American people to believe we just completely cut off contact with all of the people who we were supposed to defend against? I don't think it passes the smell test, and neither do the American people. I yield back.
Chair recognizes Mr. Kassar for 5 minutes.
I'm honored to be a new member of Congress, where our purpose is to listen to the people and represent their voices and lift up our communities. After talking to thousands of people across Texas, asking them, what do you want me to work on for you as a new member of Congress? Not a single person told me they were concerned about a New York Post story on Twitter about Hunter Biden. Is that really what we're dedicating this committee's time to? Is that really what we're going to dedicate the next 2 years to? Our constituents of all political backgrounds are worried they're getting pushed out of their neighborhoods by spiking housing costs. They see their public schools suffering because we aren't supporting our teachers. In my state, our rural hospitals are closing. We have more uninsured people than anywhere in the country. We have the highest number of food insecure kids, and reproductive rights have been stripped away. We're talking about none of that. It seems to me that we're having these hearings so that people can beat their chest about Hunter Biden, maybe do some fundraising, get some headlines, and ironically post those on Twitter. If that's what House Republicans want to spend their time on, then that's their prerogative. But to me, it's a damn shame. We're here for a bigger purpose than that. Under the leadership of the legendary chairman Jack Brooks from Texas, this committee implemented the Great Society through the creation of Head Start and the creation of Medicare. They investigated Watergate. They built the U.S. space program. Anything is possible if we all come together to work on what our constituents demand, if we make sure that we say to our constituents that your voice matters here. We could be ensuring that the historic investments in infrastructure and domestic manufacturing create good union jobs where we need them the most. We could take on free speech and civil liberties issues at home and across the world. We could be investigating and taking a look at these real threats of domestic terrorism and civil unrest. We could be making sure that our constituents' lives are better. But instead, we're focusing today on Twitter. The American people deserve better. I yield back my time to Mr. Raskin.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kassar. Let's go back to this point about the Russian disinformation campaign. And just to refresh everybody's recollection, Mr. Roth, you learned, was it before 2016 or after 2016, that Vladimir Putin had commanded an entire campaign to try to invade the American election with social media messages on Twitter, Facebook, and so on? Was that before the election you learned or after?
While there was some public discussion of it before the election, most of the confirmed information was only declassified after Election Day. Okay, so there was this powerful, massive campaign unleashed by a malign foreign actor interested in undermining American democracy with a specific electoral objective, right? Did you find that? Was he just trying to create chaos, or did he want to put the thumb on the scale with his intervention for either Hillary Clinton or Donald Trump? A bit of both, honestly. I think there was a significant amount of the troll activity on social media in particular that wasn't tilted one way or the other. It played both sides and it played them off of each other. And I think that's bad for America and it's bad for democracy. I think the hack and leak campaign was a bit more skewed because that focused very specifically on the DNC and on John Podesta.
Okay, and so the hack and leak campaign against the DNC and Hillary Clinton was one meant to damage Hillary Clinton's campaign. Is that right?
That's what most research concludes was the objective, yes.
All right. So some people are suggesting that if the U.S. government finds out about a malign foreign influence disinformation or propaganda campaign in our elections at any level, the government shouldn't say anything to the public or the news media about it. What do you think about that proposition?
I believe that would be a profound failure. I think there's a collective responsibility across the private sector and the public sector to address our shared threats, and Russian interference in American democracy is one of those shared threats.
Okay. Ms. Gaddy, do you agree with that?
Yes, I do.
Okay. And just back to you, Ms. Navaroli, for a moment. Did you follow the attempt to overthrow the official election result in Brazil?
I was not working at Twitter at the time, but I paid attention to the news, yes.
Okay, and were you struck by any of the resemblances between what happened in Brazil and what happened here on January 6th?
Yes, it was the exact same playbook that was played on January 6th, in which a ruling party claimed that an election was stolen, and that misinformation continued to spread and lead to political violence.
Thank you. I yield back, Mr. Chairman.
Chair recognizes Mr. Fallon for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. If there was ever, if there's ever a time where our government becomes the sole arbiter of truth, then we've lost the United States. Twitter's become the virtual town square. It now has the power to transform public opinion like no other medium in history, with their algorithms shaping and molding the public mind to their own ends. Mr. Roth, to the best of your knowledge, what percentage of your colleagues when you worked at Twitter donated to Democratic causes or candidates in 2020?
I don't know, sir.
We have it here. It was 98.4% of Twitter employees gave to Democratic candidates or causes in the 2020 election cycle. And believe it or not, those numbers actually went up in the 2022 cycle to 99.7% of Twitter employees donating to Democratic candidates and causes. So clearly, Twitter as a whole had a political bias. Mr. Roth, do you personally think that you have a political bias? And did you have one when you worked at Twitter? A personal political bias?
No, sir.
You didn't. That's remarkable because it's pretty obvious you did have strong biases when you compared, ironically using Twitter, people that worked in the Trump White House to Nazis. They were good folks that you simply disagreed with politically in our representative republic, and you compared them to the most evil people on the planet that murdered 60 million people, or at least were responsible for those deaths. You think that was a little bit hyperbolic?
Yes, I do. As I said, I regret the language.
I agree with you. It was. And so your political opinion spilled over into censorship work at Twitter. I think your biases had consequences, which you intentionally expressed through your propaganda and censorship role at Twitter. Additionally, you may have collaborated with U.S. intelligence community regarding stories that you all didn't want the public to see. So namely, what we refer to as the Hunter Biden laptop story that ran in the New York Post. So I'll ask you, Mr. Roth, did you receive 10 confidential documents from Special Agent of the FBI, Elvis Chan, the night before the Hunter Biden laptop story ran?
Yes.
You did. See, because it's interesting, with the immediacy with which you all acted to censor the New York Post Hunter Biden laptop story seems to be very indicative of foreknowledge. And the story was seismic, and it was rushed to be suppressed, knowing full well it was not Russian disinformation, as some here said. It was truth that was denied the American voter. And the Media Research Center polled Democratic voters in 2020 swing states and found that 17% would have changed their vote if they had known the contents and evidence of the New York Post story. President Trump lost key states, Georgia, Pennsylvania, Arizona, and Wisconsin, by collectively just over 100,000 votes. And if this is accurate, this poll, 3.2 million votes could have swung. And he only needed a teeny fraction of those 3.2 million. That decision almost certainly changed the result of the 2020 presidential election. Did you have any idea the contents of the New York Post story, Mr. Roth?
Only what I read in the New York Post that day.
And then it was killed by Twitter, and the mainstream media followed. So I found this interesting. In 2019, candidate for President Joe Biden said, and I quote, "I have never spoken to my son about his overseas business dealings." And yet, the evidence in that story and on that laptop revealed that two of Hunter's Mexican business associates, Miguel Magnati and Miguel Velasco, visited the White House in February 2014, and he was later photographed. Joe Biden was photographed with him in the White House. Also in October 2015, Hunter arranged a video conference with his dad, Joe Biden, the sitting vice president, and Carlos Slim, the Mexican billionaire. And then unbelievably in 2015, Hunter introduced his father, then vice president, to Vadam Pazarski, an executive at the now infamous Burisma Holdings Company, where Hunter would later magically make millions as a board member despite having no experience whatsoever in the energy sector. Joe Biden lied. He created the firewall, and then he was exposed because of this story and other information. He lied to the American people, and Mr. Roth, you withheld information on the eve of a presidential election, and you protected that lie. And I hope for the sake of the country that men like you that do those things, men and women, never get to put in such power, in positions of power again. And Mr. Chairman, I'd also like to see if, I'd like to ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a tweet from Ranking Member Raskin. The tweet reads, "It's horrifying to see images of Border Patrol agents whipping Haitian refugees at the Texas border. Not exactly the feeling I get from the Statue of Liberty."
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you.
I yield back.
Yep. Oh, well, I just think that's misinformation, or at least it was a mistake, and Twitter left it up for a week, or not a week, a year, a full year.
Gentleman yields.
I yield.
Mr. Baker, in top of page 2 in your written testimony, you said, "I did not destroy or improperly suppress
Whose time is this?
any documents at Twitter regarding information important to the public dialogue." The way you worded that, it sounds like there is some
Chairman, how much extra time is he going to get during this hearing? You finished
He
the
had
question, and then you
time.
think
Let him
it's
repeat the
disorder.
question, and then his time will be expired. And
It
please
expired
answer.
before he started.
Clearly, it's up to the chairman, so why don't you let him answer?
Mr. Baker, on top of page 2 of your written testimony, you said, "I did not destroy or improperly suppress any documents at Twitter regarding information important to the public dialogue." The use of the term improperly suppressed suggests there was some kind of suppression done in a proper way. I just want to know what that was, and is this referring to your work at Twitter when the Twitter files were first released just a few months ago?
Unfortunately, sir, I think I'm constrained from answering that question any more fully than in my testimony because of attorney-client privilege. So unfortunately, I'm just going to have to leave it at that.
I thought that's been waived.
Not the privilege, not the privilege. The non-disclosure agreement, my understanding, has been waived, but not the attorney-client privilege.
Gentlemen, time's expired.
I do not have anything in writing to indicate that the Twitter has waived privilege with respect to that matter.
Chair recognizes Ms. Crockett.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. State, as MAGA Republicans there pushed an agenda just as insidious as the foreign interference we experienced in the 2016 election, we should be talking about what they don't want to talk about as they continue to cut you off as you try to talk about things such as interfering with our democracy, and how there has been an inciting of political violence against individuals as well as our democracy as a whole. We are supposed to live in the land of the free, and when some people are afraid of losing power, they engage in conspiracy theories and distractions, such as the Joe Biden, a candidate at the time, not government actor at the time, colluded with social media to win. So let me say thank you for showing up for this political theater. Unfortunately, the American people deserve better of its leaders. They deserve a robust conversation around the very real and very present threats to our democracy, the greatest democracy in this world. So with that being said, let me be clear. I believe that there has been testimony previously by Miss Navaroli. I hope I'm not just killing your name right now. At some point, you stated if January 6th and anything like it, that language, if we would have seen that happen in any other country with any other leader, Twitter would have acted completely differently. It is my understanding from this statement, and correct me if I'm wrong, that you almost felt as if Trump was treated differently. In fact, that you may have been of the impression that he was treated with more deference than other world leaders. Is that true?
Yes. As I testified earlier today, Twitter bent and broke its own rules in order to protect dangerous speech, like the tweets that were directed towards Representative Ocasio-Cortez.
And when we talk about bending, it's my understanding from another deposition that there were actual alarms that would go off if someone would access Trump's Twitter account other than, I believe, the CEO.
It was my understanding that alarms would ring within Twitter if the account was accessed outside of a select group of individuals who had access to that account.
Are you aware of this being an ongoing practice for other individuals' Twitter accounts?
At my time at Twitter, the former President Donald Trump's account was the only account that I did not have access to.
Okay, so we know that there weren't individual actors running around Twitter setting off alarms every other day. Is that correct?
Not to my knowledge, no.
Okay. Now, as we talk about January 6th, because I think that's the only thing we should be talking about, what I want to talk about is what, and anyone can answer this question. Did you see a correlation between a rise in homegrown domestic white supremacy online as it correlates to leading up to January 6th?
I can answer that. So some of the things that we were seeing specifically on Twitter related to white supremacy fan fiction. I mentioned earlier in my testimony that we saw things like people wishing that the day of the rope would occur. That comes from things like the Turner Diaries, which are, again, white supremacy fan fiction.
You would also agree with me that it was clear that white extremists were seemingly triggered and activated to take action against our very democracy here at home by some of the activity that was going on Twitter, correct?
Yes, I believe so.
Now, just to make sure that we can summarize what we allegedly are here to talk about, you all would agree with me when I say that there was no physical damage or destruction to structures, limb, or life as it relates to this article, yet we do know that there was actual harm, physical harm, as well as destruction that occurred as a result of January 6th, correct?
Yes, people died on January 6th.
Thank you. With that, I'll yield the remainder of my time to Chairman Raskin, or Ranking Leader Raskin.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, I would just use the second to ask unanimous consent to submit for the record an extraordinary article just published called "Twitter Kept Entire Database of Republican Requests to Censor Posts," published on February 8th. It was just published by Rolling Stone. So for everybody's reading enjoyment, if people think it was biased against conservatives, this would lead us to believe it was definitely biased against liberals and progressives.
Didn't have you pegged for a Rolling Stone reader, but without objection, so ordered. Chair recognizes Mr. Groffman.
First of all, just a comment. When we talk about the Pledge of Allegiance, one of the lines in there is, "To the Republic for which we stand." Ben Franklin, when he was asked about our Constitution, he said, "We give you a republic if you can keep it." Just two lines that maybe some people around here haven't heard. Now, this is kind of a little story for the three of you on the left here. In January of 2021, the Christian magazine called the Daily Citizen tweeted about President-elect Joe Biden's announcement that Dr. Rachel Levine was his nominee for Assistant Secretary of Health. They commented that Dr. Levine is a transgender woman. This was banned from Twitter. Are you familiar with this story?
I'm not familiar with it, sir.
Do you have any reason why it would have been banned? Okay. There are local talk radio hosts in my area, well-known media hosts out of the Madison, Milwaukee, Green Bay media market, widely listened to. They were shadow banned on Twitter. There's some very prominent doctors in the area that didn't agree, perhaps, with everything CDC or NIH said, that were banned on Twitter. I'd like you to comment on that because, normally I think when people make a major health decision, they always like to get two separate opinions. And some of these doctors who are wildly well-respected, probably two of the most prominent doctors in Wisconsin, thought outside the mainstream. And I think if we're thinking outside the mainstream, they were taken off your platform. Could you comment on why you would take somebody off a platform, or why a distinguished doctor would be considered something that the public as a whole couldn't hear their version of events? No, you're not aware that ever any doctors who commented outside the mainstream version of what was going on with COVID, going on with the vaccine, going on with treatments, that there were people who disagreed with the NIH recommendations and you took them off of Twitter? You're not familiar with that? None of you are familiar with that. Okay. I'll yield some time to Jim Jordan then.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. Mr. Baker, Mr. Roth earlier said he thought it was a waste of time for the FBI to be sending you accounts that they thought violated Twitter's terms of services and Twitter's policy. I was just curious, did you ever tell Twitter executives or FBI acquaintances that the FBI had no legitimate interest in enforcement of Twitter's policy?
Sir, I'm going to give you the same answer I gave before. I think the advice that I was giving internally to folks would be covered by the attorney-client privilege. And as
let me
yes,
stop, Mr. Baker. Although you're testified today by subpoena, you nonetheless have raised the attorney-client privilege to avoid answering this committee's question. Congress does not recognize the common law attorney-client privilege. With that, I'm going to allow Mr. Jordan to ask the question again.
Well, there's been two questions I've asked that he's refused to answer. So let me, if I could, Mr. Chairman, I'll ask both again. I'll go back to the one asked a couple minutes ago. Top of page 2 of your testimony, you said, quote, "I did not destroy or improperly suppress any documents at Twitter regarding information important to the public dialogue." I would like to know what you're referring to that you, in your mind, properly suppressed, and when that took place, specifically if it took place during the time that the Twitter files were first being released just a few months ago?
Well, again, sir, as I think we've notified the committee and we've had these conversations with Twitter as well to try to resolve this issue prior to coming up here today, I don't have anything in writing that clears me in my ethical responsibilities to my former client with respect to answering questions that I think fall squarely within the attorney-client privilege. So unfortunately, I don't think I can go beyond what I've said there already, sir.
Unfortunately, Mr. Baker, your assertion that the attorney-client privilege, it's overruled as to this particular question and answer. So will you please answer the question by Mr. Jordan?
Point of order, Mr. Chairman.
State your point.
Well, as I understand it, because we just went through this in the January 6th committee where multiple witnesses asserted attorney-client privilege, including people who weren't covered by it at all. Ultimately, that's for a court to decide. So I don't think there's anything we can do within the committee at this point, unless I'm missing something.
We'll give you one more chance to answer the question. If you don't answer it, then we'll have to deal with it after the committee hearing. Mr. Baker, could you answer the question, please?
I apologize, but I believe I have ethical responsibilities to my former client, and I don't think I can go beyond what I've said already, unfortunately.
Yeah, I just said that.
Mr. Baker, you did suppress documents then that, in your language, was important to the public dialogue?
I'm going to give you an extra minute, Mr. Goldman.
Oh, thank you very much.
I'm sorry, sir. Could you repeat the question?
Again, going on what your written testimony. So you did suppress documents at Twitter regarding information that was important to the public dialogue. That's a yes or no.
I'm going to answer the question with the following sentence, which is right after that. At all times, I sought to help my client understand and comply with its legal obligations.
Okay. Gentlemen's time's expired. I recognize Mr. Goldman for 6 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I understand that Mr. Palmer was asking some questions about some of my assertions about the removal of the Ukrainian Prosecutor General. First, let's be clear, I did not say that Vice President Biden fired Mr. Shokin. It was official U.S. and European policy to encourage Ukraine to fire him, which they did. But he is right about one thing. What I say is not evidence, and neither is what any of our Republican colleagues say on the other side of the aisle. They may not like what these witnesses say, but the testimony of the witnesses is the evidence, not baseless statements without firsthand knowledge. But I urge Mr. Palmer, if he wants to understand what actually happened, to read the 300-page report that we published on the first impeachment investigation. There's a lot in there about Mr. Shokin. Luckily, though, he doesn't even have to do that. You can just read the New York Post story itself, because in that story, Shokin admitted that he never opened an investigation into Burisma. He claims to have had, quote, specific plans to do so. Yeah, sure. For 2 years, Rudy Giuliani had been peddling Victor Shokin's bogus story, including with agents of Russian intelligence. And Chairman Comer, if you question that, I urge you to look up Andrei Derkach. So who was the sole source of the hard drive to the New York Post? Rudy Giuliani. And for these reasons, many journalists were highly skeptical. One reporter at the New York Post itself refused to put his name on the story. Fox News' Brett Baer said, quote, "The whole thing is sketchy," unquote. And both Giuliani and the Post refused to give the laptop to other journalists to verify and analyze it. In fact, Giuliani told the New York Times that he hoped that it would be published before it could be verified. So what is the so-called authentication for this laptop? Well, Chairman Comer said in his opening statement that it's a subpoena to the computer repair shop owner, which happened over about a year before the New York Post story. But that is not the same hard drive that Rudy Giuliani received months later from that repair shop owner and passed along to the New York Post after he was in possession of it for several months. Now, Mr. Baker, based on your understanding of Russian malign influence campaigns, does Russian intelligence have the capacity to manipulate a hard drive?
Yes.
So it is possible that some of the materials on a hard drive could be authentic, and some could be altered, manipulated, or even added to the hard drive. Is that right?
I believe so, yes.
Mr. Roth, you have testified today that Twitter was keenly aware of the hacking efforts by Russia in connection with the 2016 election. Is that right?
Yes, sir.
And those efforts, I believe you said, and correct me if I'm wrong, by Russian intelligence to interfere in our electoral process continued up and through and including the 2020 election. Is that right?
Russian efforts certainly continued through the 2020 election and even through the midterms. I couldn't say specifically if it was military intelligence, as was the case in 2016, but certainly the Russian government was involved.
So let's run down what Twitter knew about this hard drive and this story when it was published. First, the sole source of the hard drive was Rudy Giuliani, who had been working closely with Russian intelligence agents throughout 2020. Second, Russian intelligence interfered in the 2016 election and was actively trying to do it again. And third, numerous journalists, including at the New York Post and Fox News, raised suspicions about the hard drive, and they refused to allow an independent analysis and verification of it. Now, Mr. Baker, based on your experience in law enforcement, wouldn't this give anyone concerned about Russian interference in our elections serious pause?
Well, I think as reflected in the public record, at the time, I thought there were great concerns on that side of the equation, because in part with respect to all the things that had happened since 2016 with respect to the hack and leak or hack and dump issues, there were facts that indicated that the computer might have been abandoned and so on, but which made it a very difficult case, which is why we're sitting here today talking about it.
Right, and there was a 24-hour delay in continuing to spread the publication of it. Isn't that right?
Yes.
Okay. You know, that is exactly what 51 former intelligence officials, many from Republican administrations, even the Trump administration, said in that letter that is being distorted by Mr. Jordan and others at this hearing. Let me quote one paragraph of what they say. We want to emphasize that we do not know if the emails provided to the New York Post by President Trump's personal attorney, Rudy Giuliani, are genuine or not, and that we do not have evidence of Russian involvement. Just that our experience makes us deeply suspicious that the Russian government played a significant role in this case. And unless Twitter, like Special Counsel Mueller concluded about the Trump campaign in 2016, wanted to welcome Russian interference in an election, all of you sitting here today were entirely correct to be highly concerned about the legitimacy of this story. I yield back.
Chair recognizes Mr. Higgins for 5.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to be yielding some time to my colleague, Mr. Jordan, here momentarily. But for the record, Mr. Baker, Ms. Gotti, Mr. Roth, Mr. Navaroli, are you here under the advice of counsel, and do you have counsel present?
Yes, sir.
That was a yes?
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
Yes, I do.
Yes, I was subpoenaed
That's
to
good
appear.
to know. I'm glad you all have counsel present. Mr. Chairman, for the for submission for the record, I'd like consent to submit the Twitter files dated December the 8th, posted by the New York Post regarding the suppression of conservative commentators. I'd like that submitted.
Without objection, so ordered.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I'd like to also submit for the record a timeline of events with cited sources outlining strong evidence of the Biden family organized criminal actions would certainly indicate that we've crossed the threshold of reasonable suspicion. I'd like this timeline submitted for the record.
Excuse me, Mr. Chairman, where is that from, that timeline?
Timeline in my hand, boss. I'll get it to you shortly. bottom line is that the FBI had the Biden crime family laptop for a year. They knew it was leaking. They knew it would hurt the Biden campaign. So the FBI used its relationship with Twitter to suppress criminal evidence being revealed about Joe Biden 1 month before the 2020 elections. You, ladies and gentlemen, interfered with the United States of America 2020 presidential election, knowingly and willingly. That's the bad news. It's going to get worse because this is the investigation part. Later comes the arrest part. Your attorneys are familiar with that. Mr. Chairman, I'd like to spend 5 hours with these ladies and gentlemen doing depositions surely yet to come. But for right now, I'll yield the balance of my time to my colleague, Mr. Jordan.
I thank the gentleman for yielding. I think he made the right point. And I would just respond to to our colleague from New York. You know who knew the laptop was real was the FBI. They had it for, or maybe they had it for a year and just said, you know what, we're going to put it on the shelf, we're not going to look at it. But if anyone knew it was real, it's them. That's why I asked the question, again, back to my colleague from New York, what he was talking about. That's why I asked the question earlier. I said, did anyone at the FBI or Mr. Baker know, did Mr. Baker talk to any of those 51 former intel officials who sent the letters saying this has all the classic earmarks of a Russian misinformation operation? Maybe they could have checked with the FBI because the FBI had the actual laptop in their possession. So I appreciate the gentleman from Louisiana. I think it's a great point that he made. Mr. Roth, I'm going to come back to you on something we were at a few hours ago. And we're talking about this visibility filtering, which in my mind I understand to be something short of suspending and blocking the account, which the user then knows has happened because there's a notification in a public way, like you did to Ms. Green when you suspended her account. But there's other things, this search blacklist, this do not amplify, that are some kind of filtering that account that the user doesn't know about. And I asked the question earlier, was there any bit of this visibility filtering that was hard-coded by Twitter employees into the account of specific users? And you said, you hesitated for a while, and you said, well, you wouldn't use the term hard-coded, but it seemed to me like something like that went on. Can you elaborate?
Thank you for the question. Twitter's visibility filtering system, as has been reported in the Twitter files, is based on applying labels to user accounts. And so in that sense, if the application of a label is what you meant by hard-coded, yes, Twitter systems did apply those designations to those accounts. But it was seldom the case that Twitter staff would manually, individually go in and apply those labels directly.
Were any government officials, were those labels and therefore that filtering done to any government officials, any elected officials where the user wouldn't know about?
I don't know, sir. I didn't have access to my Twitter computer, to any Twitter systems to prepare me to answer that question. So
I'm just talking your time there, and your experience there. Do you know if that happened?
It would not surprise me to know that visibility filtering labels had been applied to the accounts of elected officials.
So visibility filtered labels applied to the accounts, but the user doesn't know.
Yes, it was not Twitter's practice to notify users.
But you think that happened to elected officials and government officials?
Again, I couldn't say for sure.
I appreciate it. I yield back.
Chair recognizes Mr. Mafumé for 5 minutes.
Well, Mr. Chairman, it's been a long morning and afternoon. And at this point in time, there's an adage that says everything that can be said has been said, except that not everyone has said it. So if you will indulge me for a few minutes, I'd just like to reflect on some observations having sat here and gone through this. And I'm hoping and praying that this is not a problem in search of a solution, because we're dedicating an awful amount of time here, and I don't want a few things to escape us. But having said that, I want to first associate myself with the remarks of Mr. Raskin, the ranking chair. His opening remarks succinctly, I think, encapsulated and put in place what many of us on this side of the aisle are feeling. And I also, as a point of personal privilege, would like to just express how many of us share the concern of the gentlewoman from South Carolina who indicated her ongoing medical condition, which she said she might have to live with the rest of her life. That just got me for a moment, and I wanted to make sure that that's on the record. Now, I would disassociate myself with her remarks when she said, as did the gentlewoman from Georgia, God bless Elon Musk. For me, it's God bless my country, God bless my family, God bless my friends. Mr. Musk can take care of himself. I would also caution, if I might, all of us, but particularly the gentleman from South Carolina who said earlier that there is proof that Hunter Biden committed multiple felonies. The gentleman said that without offering anything for the record, and I know we're all covered by congressional immunity in terms of when we're on the floor and when we're in these committees, but sometimes we probably don't want to feed into hot rhetoric. I mean, we campaign in that kind of poetry, but we are elected to govern in prose. And when you do that, there's a different sense of responsibility that goes with all of us. Mr. Roth, I listened to you, and I feel bad that you were attacked. And, you know, you had to sell your home. You had to move your family. And I just want to remind you and remind myself that there are members of this committee who are also always under attack because of their race or because of their surname or because of their political affiliation. That kind of reckless incitement, I think, is best dealt with when you have content moderation. Otherwise, we gin up the rhetoric. The people who can't control themselves oftentimes don't, and then we see violence occurring against whether it's members of Congress through threats or persons like yourself in the private sector. Ms. Navaroli, you in your testimony stated that on the morning of January the 6th that you sent lawyers a message warning them that your team was hamstrung by leadership. And 2 days later, when it looked like that might happen again, you asked management whether or not they wanted more blood on their hands. What was their response, and what did they do?
Yes, thank you for that question. On the morning of January 6th, I did send that message to a Twitter lawyer specifically because I believe that Twitter was going to be facing liability for what was going to occur that day. I do not remember their exact response, but I do remember there coming in a response of confirming that the information had been received. Would you repeat the second question that you asked?
I wanted to know what was their response. What did they do?
Nothing.
Okay, you went on to say that in January of 2020, after the United States assassinated an Iranian general, that the president at that time, Mr. Trump, decided to justify it on Twitter, and management literally instructed you to make sure that we were not about to start World War III on that platform. Is that correct?
Yes, that did occur.
And what happened after that?
It was up to me and my team to create what we called enforcement guidance, so a document that explained how we would apply our policies specifically related to content moderation in that specific instance. I believe the document was relating to foreign policy discourse.
So my point here about content moderation on the front end prevents some of the crazy things we see on the back end. Mr. Chairman, I have from the Anti-Defamation League their latest report on murder and extremism in the United States, oftentimes fueled by the lack of content moderation, that I would ask unanimous consent be entered into the record. And I also have the National Threat Assessment done by the Secret Service of our country. This was just released, and it talks about how 25% of all of these acts are being conducted by people who are not moderated, but who in fact end up breaking the law and threatening the lives of people. And I would ask unanimous consent that also be.
Without objection, so ordered.
Thank you, sir.
Chair recognizes Mr. Sessions for 5 minutes.
Mr. Chairman, thank you very much. So I will say it, God bless Elon Musk, because I think I feel that way. It was Elon Musk that revealed data that uncovered a disturbing cabal. Let's be clear, we're here today because Twitter got caught, not because people wanted to admit mistakes got made, or
perhaps because they got bought. If not for the Twitter files released by Mr. Elon Musk, this activity we're discussing today would still be going on. It's no secret that the political bias of Twitter and their previous leadership bled into politics and merged that with practices of the company. And that is a big concern. But a bigger concern is where our government, on a political basis by law enforcement, becomes engaged in things that a timeline would show were not truthful. That's the concern. The fact that Twitter was working hand in glove with the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the intelligence community to suppress free speech and things that were not true is disturbing. That is why we are here today. So, Mr. Roth, I would engage you if I could for a minute. By the way, I want to compliment all four of you. You've been here all day. This is hard to do. You've kept your cool. To the best of your ability, you're expressing honesty. I admire that. Mr. Roth, can you please tell me about the meetings with the FBI? How many? Where did they take place? How do they accomplish what they wanted?
Thank you for the question.
Yes, sir.
Twitter met with the FBI, I would estimate, several dozen times over the course of multiple years. These meetings happened in person, in the Twitter office, in the offices of other technology companies, and at times they happened virtually. We issued press releases about these meetings. They were not happening in secret. They were not anything that the public sector or the private sector strove to hide from anybody. But in these meetings, we used it as an opportunity to discuss the shared threats of foreign malign interference, to discuss the preparations that the public and private sector were implementing, and to use that as an opportunity to make sure that we were having open channels of communication about those malign interference threats.
Mr. Roth, did you at any time believe that the Bureau might not be honest about the things they knew and the information that they shared and passed to you?
I would say I have a personal healthy skepticism about any type of law enforcement, but no, it was never my experience that representatives of the FBI were anything but forthright in those discussions.
Do you believe that they, today, in looking back, misled you?
I don't believe so, no.
So you believe that the things which they told you, in looking back, are truthful even today?
To the best of my recollection, yes.
So the chance for FBI numerous times, dozens of times, to meet with you, did you put out information of the substance when you said you provided the public with information? Did you discuss what those meetings were about?
I believe the public statements were fairly high level and talked about preparations for upcoming elections in the United States. Any internal records or meeting minutes would be on my Twitter computer, which I don't have access to.
And does that reside, to the best of your knowledge, currently at Twitter?
Yes, sir. I returned all Twitter property to the company when I chose to leave.
Yes, and that would be a requirement, generally speaking.
Yes.
So you believe that the Bureau met with you, they did not mislead you, that you were as forthright as you could be to the public, and that you were playing the role that you felt like was responsible. Is that your testimony today?
Yes, sir, it is.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back, and Stansbury. Yeah. Oh, yeah, yes. I'm sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, I'm beginning to feel like a little bad for the majority. Like, I just feel guilty because you guys have come today to try to prove that the Biden administration in coordination with Twitter is impugning free speech. And the problem is that Donald Trump, he is just this thing that hangs around your neck. Because at every turn, he undermines whatever credibility you want to have on this subject. I mean, Donald Trump and his administration, it's been proven, reached out to Twitter to take down tweets that got under his skin. The tough guy, Donald Trump, right? He got called the B word. Let's reach out to Twitter. Let's get the tweet taken down. You guys have no credibility. You have none. Your own guy taking free speech off of Twitter. You know, I also don't understand this bipolar thing that you're doing with Joe Biden. So every day you guys tweet out, Joe Biden is boring, he's sleepy. Every day you say it on TV. Now you want to tell the American people Joe Biden is an international super mastermind along with his son Hunter. I mean, it's just bananas. You know, the Trump family is getting billions of dollars of loans from foreign governments by using their White House relationships. Any questions? Any questions on that? No, I didn't think so. You want to know if the Trump family made any money selling PPE during the pandemic out of the West Wing? Any questions about that? No, I didn't think so. But let's move on to Hunter Biden's laptop. Your leaker, I always love this, by the way. You guys are against leakers unless they're leaking things you like. Your leaker, Matt Isaac, and I love, you know, have you seen this guy? I mean, he's like a Radio Shack dot matrix guy who copied files off a private citizen's hard drive. Okay? That's your entire theory is based off of. But I want to use his words. This is his own words. Your guy, your leaker, the guy who gave you the information. There have been several attempts by several individuals to modify and insert fake data. I do know there has been multiple attempts over the past year and a half to insert questionable material into the laptop, to pass off information or disinformation as coming from the laptop. He continued, "This is a major concern of mine because I fought tooth and nail to protect the integrity of the drive, and to jeopardize that is going to mean everything I sacrificed will be for nothing." Your guy, your leaker, questioning the integrity of the information you guys are peddling. By the way, why isn't he here? Bring him here. Let's ask him questions. And why haven't we seen the hard drive? You guys aren't shy. Why won't you show it to the American people? Let's talk about Twitter. Let's talk about God bless Elon Musk. See these? God bless the guy who is allowing Nazis and anti-Semitism to perpetrate Twitter. There's been a 66% increase of anti-Semitism on Twitter since Elon Musk set it free. Mr. Chairman, I agree with you. It's not fair to say all conservatives are Nazis. That's preposterous. That's not true. But your Lord and Savior Donald Trump is having tea and dinner with them at Mar-a-Lago. Nick Fuentes right here, who is a picture that is tweeted at me all the time saying Jews are a virus in response to my tweets. Donald Trump's having dinner with him. Nazis at Mar-a-Lago. And so, no, not all Republicans are Nazis, but I got to tell you, Nazis seem really comfortable with Donald Trump. So I have questions about that, Mr. Chairman. Why is that? Why do I get these tweets? Let's talk about Kanye West, right? The chairman of the Judiciary Committee for 3 months praising Kanye West. We love Kanye, right? A Nazi. Clearly now. It took months for that tweet to come down. How come? I mean, these are things I'd love to know. Is it because maybe they're your voters? I mean, they certainly aren't voting for me. I yield back.
Chair recognizes Mr. Langworthy for 5 minutes.
The Twitter files revealed the unrestricted power and censorship regularly exercised by the 3 witnesses in front of us today, Mr. Roth, Ms. Gaddy, and Mr. Baker. Now, Ms. Navaroli, in your opening, you stated that too few people and companies have too much power. Well, I think you're right. The witnesses here today, they had too much power at Twitter. And they tried to play the role of God as they interfered with a natural right of the people to a free and fair election. Twitter knowingly suspended the New York Post's account, one of the most reliable conservative. Mr. Roth, the Twitter files revealed that you rarely adhered to company policy in making your censorship decisions. One reporter from the Twitter files called your group a, quote, high-speed Supreme Court of moderation, issuing content rulings on the fly, often in minutes, based on guesses, gut calls, and even Google searches in cases even involving the president. Do you recall making decisions in this manner?
No, I do not.
Can you explain the process for these quick decisions?
Thank you for the question. I think the core of content moderation, whether it's fast or slow, begins with a written set of rules and policies, and that was the primary responsibility of my group at Twitter. It wasn't about making a one-off decision in the moment. It was about having a written and codified set of, well, laws for the platform that we followed in each instance. In the vast majority of cases, content moderation decisions were not made by me or by another executive or even by a member of my direct team. They were made by hundreds of content moderators enforcing those rules again and again and again. The situations in which decisions would be escalated to senior executives were few and far between and largely related to the really hard gray area calls.
So, Mr. Roth, as part of the, quote, Supreme Court of moderation at Twitter, did you have the final call over political censorship decisions?
No, sir, I did not.
Then who had the final call on these decisions?
There was a team of people, some of whom represented on this panel today, others not, who were involved in trying to make these decisions. But a portrayal that any one person held sort of supreme or ultimate authority over these decisions would misrepresent what the process was.
So your team labeled high-profile accounts as VITs, standing for very important tweeters. What was the threshold for being labeled as a VIT?
That's an excellent question for which there is not a consistent answer. I don't think Twitter was particularly well put together on that definition.
So was the New York Post labeled a VIT?
I believe the New York Post's account is verified, and verification conferred some of that status of being a VIT. But again, the definitions here are a little squishy.
Now, is it true that the Twitter comms director, Trenton Kennedy, said in regard to the Post story, I'm struggling to understand the policy basis for marking this unsafe?
Yes, it's my understanding that Mr. Kennedy said that.
Was the New York Post story regarding Hunter Biden's laptop marked unsafe regardless of uncertainty?
It is true that Twitter marked links to that story as unsafe in a number of our systems, which resulted in restricting people's ability to tweet it. That was the decision that Twitter reversed 24 hours later.
Well, it's clear from this panel that too few people had too much power. The New York Post Twitter account was suspended in an attempt by Democrats and big tech to go ahead and play God and interfere in a natural, free, and fair election and the free flow of information in this country. The censorship is unbounded. The New York Post has been a reliable source for decades, including their coverage of the nursing home scandals in New York during the pandemic. Now that you and many others are gone from the company, there is hope that this platform will once again be a place where voices can be heard and respected, and it can return to be a town hall for all points of view, no matter if you agree with them or not, sir, and that our elections will never again be controlled by big tech. I yield back.
Gentleman yield?
Will the gentleman yield to Jordan? Mr. Jordan.
Okay, thank you. Mr. Roth, in Missouri v. Biden, your declaration to the FEC, you said, I also learned in these meetings with the government that a hack and leak operation would involve Hunter Biden. Mr. Chan has testified in his deposition in that same case. In my estimation, we never discussed Hunter Biden specifically with Twitter. Who told you about Hunter Biden in these meetings?
Gentleman's time has expired.
My recollection is that a representative of another tech company may have mentioned it, but those meetings were several years ago. I truly don't recall.
Okay. Chair recognizes Ms. Stansbury for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I want to just start this afternoon by thanking our panelists who have been sitting here all afternoon, and many of the members of the public who are with us. I see a lot of tired faces out there, and I want to thank you all for spending your day with us. But I also want to start out by asking, what are we doing here in this committee today? Why are we here? Why is this committee devoting a day-long hearing to a political conspiracy theory that was planted in the media by Rudy Giuliani to support Donald Trump's re-election campaign? Of all the topics we could be focused on in this committee to support the American